What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. I don't have a goose handy, or I would have had a little goose thing to play with today. Used to have gooses in my old house, but I don't in this one. So this is the earlier version of the expression, the much more popular version, the version you probably heard of. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. What the heck does this mean? Well, a goose is a female goose. A gander is a male goose. And of course, a gosling is a young goose. But that aside, my experience has been pretty much the opposite with this particular idiom or expression. It's used to say that one person or situation should be treated the same as another person or situation. What's good for one person should be good for another. What situation or things apply or are good for, if something's good for one person, it should be good for another person. Now that's a pretty faulty assumption, right? Just because it's good for me doesn't mean it's good for you. It's actually based on a really non-sound foundation. But it became really, really popular because people use it as a reason or excuse or a justification for doing certain things. Now, in my personal experience, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. The sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Isn't necessarily the same thing. In school and in education, when I was growing up, there was a difference between the way boys and girls were treated. It just was the way it was. We lived in a different time. I'm 61 years old now, and so I've lived through a lot of different changes throughout the world. Not a ton, not as much as my grandmother, who just passed away at just shy of 100, but I've seen a lot of stuff, right? I've seen a lot of things. In my education, I was in a predominantly male-oriented education system in school. I went to be an engineer, and I'm an engineer. There were, I think, 4 girls in my engineering class, 4 women. We were women, not girls, but we were really girls in my school, in my classes. If we had 1 or 2 other women in our class, we were delighted by that. In corporate America, same thing. There was an unspoken set of rules for the way women behaved in business and the way men behaved in business. It was not the same thing. There were different expectations for you based on gender. Now, I think some of that's changing, and there's a lot more gender equality these days. But back when I was in corporate America, which granted it's been since 2004 now that I've been working for someone else in corporate America, there's still a lot of the same old ways of being, the same old beliefs, the same old habits that are formed and are still existing in those organizations today. But we as business owners have the opportunity to create what it is that we want to see in the world. In our leadership roles, we have the opportunity to do that. We're seeing some disparity in our political environment right now, at least here in the United States, where what's good for the goose being the politicians that have been elected by all of us citizens, is not necessarily good for the gander. We've seen it in a lot of the policies and procedures and the processes and the systems that have been put in place for our House of Representatives, are ruling the people that we've elected, not to rule over us, although they seem to think that they're there to rule over us. The people that we've elected to represent us, they seem to have separate systems for themselves. I mean, back in Obamacare, nobody in the Senate or the House was required to participate in Obamacare because they all have their own separate insurance program just for members of the House and members of the Senate, and other key executive branches, I'm sure, all have their own government funded systems as well. Those systems are much different than was offered to the rest of us in America in terms of opportunities for health care. Whether under Obamacare or not. It's not even a discussion of Obamacare. It's just one example that a lot of us can relate to. In politics and in organizations, we see this a lot. There's a pecking order, and what's good for the leader of the organization isn't necessarily what's expected or good for the rest of the people in that organization. If you're setting your business up that way, and there's a tendency to do that, you're setting yourself up for some interesting challenges ahead. I'll just put it that way. You get to control your experience. And I think what each of us need to remember is no matter what kind of a situation we find ourselves in, it's up to us to control our reaction to that experience and to make that experience our own. So I don't have a problem looking back and saying, okay, well, there were different rules for me than there were for the men that I work with. I worked in a big organization where I was the only woman. And it was really interesting, the dynamics and what was expected of me as a leader in that organization versus other people in that organization. Now, needless to say, the human resources vice president and I introduced diversity training to that particular organization, and did a series of diversity trainings for people, so they understood that everybody gets to be treated with dignity and respect, not just some people, depending on their position in the company or their union affiliations, etc. So I always remind myself, I control my experience. I created and started my own businesses because I wanted to create an environment that was conducive to the culture and the impact that I wanted to have on the world. And we each do that with our organization. Now, there's a tendency in different industries to fall in line with the industry norms. If you really want to stand out and grow and supersize your business, it's going against some of those norms, the norms that don't make sense, the things that we've done because we've always done it that way. One of my most dreaded sentences I used to hear in corporate America or interacting with customers, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just the way I am. You might as well say that's just the way I am. And that means this is how I am, and I'm never going to change no matter what you say or do. A very fixed mindset, not conducive to growth and expansion and making the world a better place. So I'd love to know your experience with this particular idiom, this expression. What's good for the goose is good for the gander is, of course, the more popular version. It appeared in John Ray's 1670 collection of English proverbs. We've referred to that one a lot over the last couple of years as I've talked about different idioms, since that was a source where a lot of expressions were written down for the first time in English. And so they became much more popular. Once something was written down and circulated, it became more popular versus just going by word of mouth. Although word of mouth is what created and spread all of these idioms and proverbs in the first place. So share in the comments below your experience with what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I always thought it should be the other way around based on my personal experience. What's good for the gander is good for the goose, because that's just been my experience. Love to know your experience. Even in relationships, I found that men thought it was okay for them to behave one way and women were expected to behave another way. Maybe that was just my upbringing. Don't know. Anyway, have an awesome day. I will, of course, be with you tomorrow with another interesting idiom. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And how might you use it in your business, in your life? I guess today's overall message is you control your experience. You decide how each and everything that you hear, think, see, smell, taste is impacting you. It's always up to you to filter and decide, what does any of this mean to you? All right, have a great day. See you tomorrow.